women's cricket and parenthood. That's all part of the bigger picture of making cricket a viable long-term career option in a way that perhaps wouldn't have been considered possible in yesteryear. We know that women's cricket's come an awfully long way, professionalism, visibility, facilities, but that does require funding. Down the years, it sometimes felt like a bit of a chicken and egg situation, not just with women's cricket, but women's sport overall. What comes first? Is it the investment or the profile? How do you raise the profile and better the product without the investment? Well, a number of boards are and have been alive to the commercial possibilities ahead in what is a growth product. And on this week's BBC Stumped podcast, we heard from Cricket Australia's CEO Nick Hockley, who explained why the women's game has seen and will continue to see money being put into it.
What we've seen is huge growth, and that's growth at every level. That's not just growth in the number of people that are watching the WBB on TV or the number of people that are coming to the Women's T20 World Cup, but it's also the number of women and girls that are actually playing the game at every level. But I think it does require investment. It requires certainly what we did on the World Cup required investment. We've built a strategic Growing Cricket for Girls fund, which is about improving facilities, opportunities for people to play. But I believe, and I believe very strongly, that the growth that we've seen over recent times demonstrates that there's a really strong business case for return on that investment, and that we need to keep continuing to invest.
That's Cricket Australia's now permanent Chief Executive Nick Hockley, and you can hear the full interview with him in this week's BBC Stumped podcast. It'll be available from tomorrow, if not later today. It's with Chari Sharma, Alistair Nicholson alongside me. But that, I felt, was a really significant statement he made about recognising a strong business case for investment in the women's game. And like a number of boards, including the ECB, CA also recognised the value of investing in their people. And a significant element of this is via parental policies, and specifically keeping women cricketers in the game when they choose to have a baby. Now, our reporter Amy Lofthouse is here with us from the BBC Sport website. Amy, you've had a really enlightening chat with Australia fast bowler Megan Shute around the question of balancing parenting with playing women's cricket, and got a really specific insight into her own personal circumstances.
Yes, so Megan is obviously one of the world's best bowlers, and she recently announced that she and her wife, Jess, are expecting their first child. And it's been quite a journey for them. It's one that they began in January when Megan began the process for reciprocal IVF.
The hardest thing at the start was choosing the sperm, because you really kind of have to have that covered before you can extract your eggs, because it's best to have them basically ready to be inseminated straight away. Mm-hmm. So yeah, started that, eventually ordered that over from the US. And then, so it's basically once you start your period, once you decide that that's going to be the month you do it, you start injecting on the second day of your period. So you're injecting a follicle stimulating hormone, and that's one injection, same time every night for the first 4 days. And then from about day 5 or 6, depending on your bloods, you start doing 2 injections, and the second injection is to stop spontaneous ovulation. So for the next 8 days after that, you do 2 injections a night. One needle is pretty easy and the other one is not so pleasant. So yeah, for about 12, 13 days, again, depending on your bloods and how well your follicles are maturing, you keep injecting. And then towards the back end, when they've decided that your follicles are matured enough, you do a trigger injection. So your final injection that is 36 hours before you go into theatre. And yeah, that makes it release from the side of the follicles. But yeah, I woke up and I felt a lot better than what I thought I would. Some good drugs, that's for sure. So the eggs are extracted. Out of the 28, there were 27 of quality, which was 27 is my favourite number. So that's just absolutely freakish that happened. And yeah, and then so they use the sperm. They obviously select the best ones out of it, inseminate all 27, and as the days go on, they'll tell you how many embryos you're going to get. And after about 5 days, they ring up and they're like, "Yep, that's it. You're done. You've managed 9 embryos," which is really good. So it's like a 1 in 3 strike rate. And yeah, so that was like the process, I guess. And then they're frozen and waiting for the time to implant them in Jess.
What was the sort of physical impact then afterwards? Because obviously, like you say, you're not great at resting. What were the sort of effects you were feeling?
Only females are really going to get this completely, but I would say it is the same as the pain of period cramps, but without the cramp. So it's just that constant kind of ache. And that was probably only mainly for the first 3 days, I reckon, 3 to 4 days. It was pretty constant, nothing like unbearable, but just I didn't really want to get up all that much, which made it funny for Jess. She had to kind of wait on me a bit.
So with it being reciprocal, is the idea that obviously Jess will carry yours and then at some point you would carry another child?
That is the plan. I have said to Jess that I could watch her go through pregnancy and childbirth and then go, no, that's not for me. So we'll see what happens in the future if I end up wanting to do that. I don't know. They always say athletes struggle with carrying children just because the body changes. That's not what frightens me the most. It's just the scariness of it. But yeah, eventually we'd love to reverse the process. But yeah, again, we'll see what happens there. At least I've laid it on the floor and I've said, if I don't want to have a child myself personally, would you be happy to carry another? And she hasn't had one yet, mind you, but she's already said yes. So
would you consider having one while you were playing, do you think? Or would it be, too big of an impact?
It's something that's I've changed my mind with over the last 12 months, actually. I was always under the impression that I would have one after I retired from all cricket, just with, physical stress and everything else that comes with it. But I think with the new pregnancy policy that's kind of come in and just the support that's now kind of been given to us that wasn't really there in the past has rekindled my thinking a little bit with, I think for sure I wouldn't have a child whilst I was playing for Australia. Mm-hmm. So I think once I get the boot from this level, I'd probably consider it for state, just purely because, it's a full-time program back in the States and it's handled individually and, everyone's extremely supportive. So I'd like to hope that if I decide I want to carry, I would do it whilst playing cricket for state still, and I would definitely have the intentions to come back at that level.
And then obviously, we've seen more recently, obviously Amy and Leah have had a baby. In tennis, Serena Williams has come back after having Olympia. Do you think it's something that female athletes don't feel as constrained by now? They don't feel as though, it's a career ender almost?
Yeah, completely agree. I think we're just talking about it more and that's making people more comfortable to have those conversations, and when you have those conversations you can make plans. So I think there's no real taboo to it now. There still is other things in women's sport, that's getting there, but I think the actual conversations of parenthood are just much more common. And I think too, depends what sport you're in and what age group you're in, obviously, but I was very open with my state teammates on the process, and because I never know if one of those kids is going to want to go through the same thing when they're older. So again, it's just conversations, and conversations opens up education and it just makes things easier. And I think now that we have policies in place that forces the conversations to happen as well, and I think we're already extremely lucky with, I think every support staff member would be extremely supportive of us anyways. That policy has just made them financially have to do it from a Cricket Australia point of view, whereas I think without a doubt, even without that policy, there'd be plenty of support from us for us from the staff. But it's cool to see that happening more across all women's sport, and hopefully that continues.
Well, that's Australia fast bowler Megan Shute with BBC Sports' Amy Lofthouse, who's in Bristol for this women's test match. Amy, she's incredibly open then about what's a really personal experience.
It is, and I think that's one of the great things about this, is that she was so willing to talk about it. And it was interesting that she said that when she goes back to her state, she's quite happy to talk about it in the dressing room, because she knows that if her experience can make one player within that setup think, I can do this as well, that's great for her. And it's something that I think in women's sport across the board we are getting a lot better at. We're talking about these issues that affect us as women, not just with pregnancy. So periods, for example, a lot of that is becoming a lot more open, and you're also seeing it taken into training now, for example. So there's an acceptance now that we as women, our bodies are different. Let's enjoy that and let's build that into our training so that we can train as best we can, rather than just making one plan for everybody.
Yeah, and I think over the years it's recognised that that's been a very under-researched area, because historically at the elite level it's been men dominating and men's sport, and therefore very little attention has been paid to women's physiology and how that impacts elite performance in particular. In the case of Megan, the professionalism in the game and the support from Cricket Australia has clearly been a significant factor in life choices, and it's changing the way she's viewing carrying a baby herself. Well, tell us a little bit more about the parental policy Cricket Australia has, and then others around the world as well that we're seeing.
So Cricket Australia were probably you could probably call them a trailblazer in this respect. They were one of the first ones to come out with a very specific pregnancy policy. So under their policy, players who have state, national or Big Bash contract who either give birth or adopt are given 12 months paid parental leave, and they're guaranteed a contract extension for the year after that, so they know they've got that security there. Similarly in New Zealand, and we saw that with Amy Satterthwaite, who's obviously returned after having her child, she kept her contract, so she had that financial security there. Pakistan also have paid maternity contract, and they also offer players to transfer to a non-playing role before they begin their maternity leave, so they can still be around the squad and still feel the benefits of it, but don't feel they have to put themselves at risk. Now the ECB, they also have a very similar policy. If a player is given full salary for 13 weeks post-birth, and then for the next 20 weeks it becomes 90% of their full salary. So we are seeing across the board a more awareness of this, and also a need to, they're aware they have to support their players financially both on and off the pitch.
Yeah, let's not forget, I mean, these are very recent policies in some cases. For example, the PCB only just a couple of months ago or even more recently announced this. So it's a very new area in the game, and yeah, not all countries even have these policies. But how does cricket stand up in terms of other sports? Is it as far advanced? Is it leading the way? What's your sense?
My sense is it is very much leading the way, just having these specific policies in place. So, for example, we see in tennis, obviously the big story has been Serena Williams returning, and also Victoria Azarenka before her. So one of the things when Serena returned really highlighted is the rankings, for example. So now, because of her return and Victoria's return, you can now use your pre-pregnancy ranking to enter 12 tournaments over a 3-year period. And that is so important if you're trying to get back on the tour, just to get the matches under your belt. You know that you don't have to, go through qualifying or rely on a wild card. Things like that are super important. And what I think we see a lot in cricket is the physical support is very good. So Claire Nicholas, who plays for Western Storm, she's currently expecting her second child. And she had to give up her 100 contract because obviously she's pregnant at the minute. She's been told that contract will still be there for her if she wants to return. And she's also
that's guaranteed, which one thing in team sport, there's always that sense of your place in the team can't be guaranteed. So how does that work?
So her place in the team isn't guaranteed, but the contract will be there if she wants it next year. So obviously it's one of the 100 contracts. So, she was set to play in it in 2020. Obviously the pandemic postponed the 100. So that contract is there for her should she choose to return after she's had her next child. But they've also created a very good sort of tailored physical program for her, so she could still train whilst pregnant, train safely, and also make sure that the skills that she'd learnt, she could keep them up throughout her pregnancy and not see it as like a limitation.
It's amazing progression, and Caroline Atkins can give us a bit of perspective, I'm sure. Caroline, hello, because your 10-year career for England was 2001 to 2011, Ashes and World Cup winner in that time. You've now got a young son, but tell us about your experience. Tell us about your son first of all.
Lawrence Foster, yeah, he's a beaut. I mean, it's the best thing I've ever done, becoming a parent. So I, in my playing days, was lucky to play alongside Aaron and Laura McLeod at England level, who both gave birth and came back to cricket. But obviously this was pre-professional sport, so they were never guaranteed any inclusion or selection, and had to back themselves to come back. And actually we did notice how well they came back, Right. There was talk of, all right, girls, everyone go and have a baby. It's really good for your batting average.
But why did you think that was?
Oh, massively. Becoming a parent now, I know it's about perspective. You become a mum, and you realise that the game is just a game.
Yeah. Amy, neither Amy and I are mothers, so we're looking to you for the parental and also the physical sense of actually pregnancy and what it does to your body, and the sense of how important it is to have some security and a plan, as like Amy was saying there, something tailored towards either playing and training when you are pregnant, at what stage you can come back. I don't know how you felt, after you'd had Lawrence, like how quick, even just getting back to, whatever your normal day-to-day exercise would have been.
I've just had a memory of like making an excuse to a square leg umpire why I didn't get this ball that was hit towards me and it's gone for 4. And I said, oh God, I reckon I'd have got that if I hadn't had a baby. And he goes, well, Jess Ennis has done all right, hasn't she, since she had a baby? I was like, well, all right then. But the tailored training and maybe my commitment to training after having Lawrence wasn't quite there, not to the Ennis standard. But I would say that the big thing for me is physically, we've got all that support, and it would be possible, and you could get back to your best, and we've seen with Aaron and Laura that they both scored a boatload of runs afterwards. But the mum guilt is, how do you cope with that? The schedules these days, they're playing so much cricket, they're away from home. You don't switch off from a role like this. You're playing sport, and it's really difficult to leave that behind.
That was something that we spoke to Sarah Elliott about. So obviously she was over here in 2013 and she'd just had her first child, and he came on the tour with her, and she would talk about she would be either breastfeeding or expressing milk in the dressing room, and she said that it was such a nice experience because her family were with her and she had Sam with her and they got to experience all this stuff together. But then when she had her second child and she went back to cricket, she said that she really did feel that guilt. It was that balance of she had to go to cricket to work to earn a living, but also she felt at the same time she was leaving her son, both her sons behind. And I think that is quite an important thing, and maybe something we don't think about, that mum guilt can affect them.
And probably, I'm sure there are either male cricketers listening to this or dads who would probably say, I feel dad guilt as well. But I don't know whether, Caroline, in your situation, and do you think that is mum guilt felt in a different way just simply because of that biological connection, because of the female having carried a baby? I don't know. It's a difficult one to judge.
I don't know if it's like biological or like just your personality, but certainly I look at me and my husband, and I think he's far easier to go off and play golf for a few days on a lad's trip than I'd find it to just go away for a few days, even a few days. I mean, I'm going to be coaching in the 100, and it was a gut-wrenching decision really whether I should risk being in a bubble for 5 weeks and not see him for that long. And it will carry on for the players that manage to do it, but also for the backroom staff as well. How do you juggle wanting to start a family and be committed to cricket, which you cannot switch off from, and the schedule is going to take you away so often?
Well, it does feel like cricket is a very particular sport in terms of the travel that is involved and that time away. And interestingly, a lot of headlines were made, in fact, when Virat Kohli, went back to attend the birth of his first child. Do you think we've moved beyond, though, now a sense of, commitment to your national team must come first, that there is more understanding, at least from the employers, if not always, from the fans?
I think the employers are definitely a lot more aware of it. I think there is a sort of understanding that, we saw recently in England with Joe Root. Obviously, he missed a test because he was about to have his second child. I think there is a lot more understanding from employers in that. I do think it's something that maybe fans aren't particularly across. I remember, as you mentioned with Virat, he got a lot of criticism for choosing to go back and be with his wife. And Jimmy Anderson similarly got some criticism when he went back during the Ashes tour to be with his wife when she gave birth. So I think while employers recognise it, I think as a society maybe we could be a little bit more understanding of that sort of issue.
I want to bring in Snehal Pradhan as well, former India international. For your perspective, Snehal, I guess first of all from listening to Megan shoot, is there anything, and from Caroline, is there anything that sounds sort of familiar, from your day? Were conversations had behind the scenes about, well, could I carry on being an international cricketer and be a mother at the same time, or were players not thinking it, or at least not talking openly about it?
Well, I'm listening to all those conversations there with a little bit of envy, I'll be honest, because the reality is that for most players in India, for the large majority of players in India, the conversation is still whether you can have a playing career and have, for example, a fulfilling relationship, a fulfilling marriage, when, like we're saying, cricket is a sport that takes you away from home so much, and Indian society is just so much more patriarchal, where women are kind of expected to make their careers a secondary priority after these institutions of marriage and all. So in my generation, it was almost implicit that you have to postpone any childbearing plans to post career, which then affects your almost social standing in a patriarchal society, where there aren't enough men who think that that's absolutely normal, and where the expectation is that women should get married at X age and have kids a few years after that. So what Caroline was talking about, how the guilt is just different for a woman doing the same thing, that's exponentially larger here in India, and which is why I'm thrilled to see the conversation around the world changing, especially with Pakistan bringing that in, because for a subcontinental team to really bring in that kind of a policy is really trailblazing, and I hope that India and the BCCI follow suit.
Yeah, and important, Caroline, from not just a playing perspective, but you've been a coach as well. You're coaching Western Storm, but I suppose it's the level of commitment as a coach, as a player, is still the same amount of time away. You're just a slightly different age doing it, slightly different stage of life, but you're still a parent. How did you juggle or approach that?
Yeah, it just made your playing days seem so brilliant, because your life was simple. You just wanted to do your best for England, and that was the one thing in your life, really. And then becoming a parent, it just throws everything out, and I felt so much guilt, and I struggled so hard to switch off after a day coaching or a couple of days away at a fixture, that in the end it wasn't a contract I renewed, because they offered for me to carry on as head coach of Western Storm, and it was affecting me, and it was affecting our family, and I could recognise that, and probably didn't speak to many people, but actually what's great about these conversations is that you wouldn't be judged for it, and you could say that you were struggling, and no one should ever feel guilty about wanting both, but about wanting a family and wanting a career. And that's that's heartbreaking to hear if India have been in that position for so long, but it's certainly, the future's looking much brighter with these conversations.
So now, how do you think it's still difficult to have those conversations now? And I guess not just players, because it is important for the game. We talk about players and the advancement of the game, but the advancement of women in coaching roles as well. Is it still difficult, do you think, at all levels?
I think this generation of players are having a very different experience, because they're looking around the world, they're looking at their peers, they're looking at the people they share dressing rooms with in the WBBL and in the Kia Super League, and they're seeing a different way. They're seeing the possibilities that, it doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think that's really affecting the way they are looking at the world, and they are looking at how the world should be and how their own life choices should be. And I can see that. And I think it'll take a generation. It'll take probably this generation of players, the younger players who are there right now, to really move through, become senior players, and then move into the coaching ranks, for us to see that happen. Because right now in the coaching ranks, players of my generation and older, I certainly see this almost binary, where you either choose your career or you choose this family life. So that is a very real situation in India, but I do see it changing through this generation.
And Caroline, given what you were just saying then about Western Storm and opting sort of not to carry on, is there anything that could have been put in place that would have made it easier to, or is the travel commitment just something that has to be accepted in cricket, and does it have to be a black and white choice? Can you think of anything that might have facilitated you carrying on, if you could have waved a magic wand and said, yep, whether it might be, I don't know, is it higher pay to facilitate childcare? Is it having a creche at the ground for all parents? I mean, this is something for the men as well. I'm sure there used to be a facility for players and their families at test matches, if that's still the case right now. But yeah, if you had a magic wand, is there anything that you think that you could have changed that might have encouraged you to stay in the game as a coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just decided, rather than put a ceiling on my coaching career, I feel like it's just on hold, and we'll see how I feel as Lawrence gets older and he starts disowning us for being embarrassing parents.
Probably doesn't take very long, doesn't it, for kids?
Well, yeah, we're still at the time where he's happy for me to throw balls. Yeah, he thinks I'm great. That's good. But I will say that with the Western Storm role, it was more, I think, my personal ability to deal with that, and there'll be other players that can do it, and there's obviously countless men that do it all the time, leave their families at home for several months of the year even. So for me, I felt like if perhaps I sought more help and support and maybe chunked up my thinking to actually I can be the best coach I can be and the best mum I can be, but I've got the binary thinking. It's in me that thinks I am limiting how good I can be as a mum by pursuing a cricket career. And perhaps if someone could shake that thinking up and help me marry up the two, then it would be possible. But I don't think practicalities weren't an issue, because I've got such a supportive family that I was able to leave Lawrence and not worry about him being cared for, loved, and his safety was not the problem. But yeah, it's just my thinking and wanting to be that best mum you could be.
Is that, Amy, do you think, where visible role models come in? I mean, we're going to talk about player role models all the time, but in the coaching world, to visibly see a number of women who are being mothers and who are managing to marry up those roles, and perhaps with some sort of support in place, which isn't there. And, you could extend that even to, as much as, visibility in the game for women coaches is one thing, and probably like to think that visibility in the game of, female commentators in the game is another. And I can't really think of any who are managing to be, or have tried to be, a mother and a travelling the world sort of global cricket commentator at the same time. I honestly put my hand on my heart. I can't see how I would actively keep doing it. It would require an incredible, inordinate amount of support, and also the nature of cricket broadcasting and media is very freelance. It's contract to contract. Nobody has maternity clauses or the stability of a staff contract. But sometimes with that thinking, what Caroline's saying, it does take you seeing someone who's done it before and saying, okay, it is possible and it can change your thinking.
It is. So
I think Cass Naidu.
Yes,
sorry, just to come in.
Yes, Cass is coming back in a big way, isn't she? Yeah.
But it's probably important to note that she took almost a 5-6 year break, had 3 children, and then now she's coming back.
I also think with Emma Hayes at Chelsea Women as well, obviously she was very visibly pregnant when they won one of their many trophies, and that was so important because we saw Emma go through her pregnancy, she came back, Chelsea Women are now the best team in England, and things like that are so important. And even things like when Serena Williams came back, when she won her first title after becoming a mum, Olympia was on court with her, and Olympia was there with the trophy and the presentation, and things like that I think are so important. You do get people saying, oh, it's a little bit, a bit schmaltzy, but it's not. You're able to see as a woman someone who is at the top of their game, balancing that with being a mum, and that's something that we as women, we're all going to have to grapple with at some point. Like you say, Ali, cricket is, it was something that actually I thought about after speaking to Megan, is that it might be a choice I have to make one day, that I have to look and think, can I carry on doing what I love and raise a family, or have I got to make that choice at some point? And it is a difficult thing to do.
And it depends on so many circumstances. Doesn't it? It depends, whether you choose to, whether it's a partner who has a particular job that in fact facilitates them being more of the stay-at-home parent, while you can spend, much longer at work. Cricket is not a 9-to-5 job where you commute to the same place every day. It depends. Some people may opt to have a child on their own as well. But then how do you again marry that with such a sort of uneven, unpredictable, environment that cricket is? I wonder whether, here's a pretty sort of outlandish thing, but in terms of keeping women in sport and elongating careers, we've got to talk about biological clock, because if women are hopefully going to stay in the game longer and if coaches are going to stay in the game, interestingly, going back to 2014, I think, wasn't it, when Apple and Facebook announced that they were offering the chance for female employees to freeze eggs in order to, well, it's part of their inclusion policies to support women. I mean, that would be a radical extension of some of these parental policies that boards are putting in place, wouldn't it?
It would, and I guess with that, you've also got, obviously, people have to make their own personal choices about those things. What was interesting when we spoke to Megan was that she said that reciprocal IVF was the choice for her, because she was scared that any other form of IVF, she wouldn't have the bond with the baby. So she wanted to feel that it was part of her, it was her biology. And that was really interesting. And that's something that I didn't really think of, with something like that. I guess you sort of just assume that, you're going to have that bond instantly with the baby. But it was really interesting to hear that and think about those sort of issues. And it's really cool what Apple have done. Like, that's such a strong statement from such a big company to say, your biology is not your limit. You can go and have a baby and come back and we will be there for you. And that is something that cricket is now starting to grasp. Personally, I think better than most sports.
And again, something like egg freezing is a very personal choice, and there are all sorts of different moral viewpoints as well, bound up in that as well. But in terms of, you use the word choice, Amy, which is, I guess, all about broadening women's choices. It's not saying it's there as an option, you have to use it, but it's giving that option and providing a wider perspective on what your pathways can be, I guess. But again, I mean, Sneha, there's cultural differences in that as well, aren't there? And you've already mentioned about just the different way in which marriage is viewed. And there's no sort of one policy fits all, is there, across the world and across cricket as to how to best support women in these circumstances?
Yeah, it's really something that has to be on a nation-to-nation, almost even person-to-person conversation basis. It probably is a good time, considering that cases like Amy Satterthwaite and Leah Tahu, who are making headlines around the world. Soon we're all going to be talking about a mini Megan shoot, and the fact that it's happening in such a visible way is going to prompt these conversations in each and every countries. And I'm really hoping that this new generation of players, it really expands the view of what's possible for them, and then when they think of that, if they have that conversation with their boards and the people in charge, saying that, hang on, we want something, we want a little more than what we've thought we could get. And in many ways, the BCCI is the leading sports body in India for all its sins that we keep talking about. Cricket is one of the better run sports, probably the best run sport in India. So it is, like we're saying, an opportunity for cricket to continue leading the way with those conversations in the subcontinent. And I'm really hopeful of seeing more of those in the next 5 years, driven by some of these younger players.
Yeah, that gives us a very positive note to start to wrap up on, I think. Caroline, a sort of final thought from you, having been in the elite cricket environment. Do you think cricket is where else would you like to see the parental support extend to, do you think? I guess it's that bit of a magic wand again.
Yeah, I don't think it's unique to sport. I just think, like women in general, if they're following their careers, they've got to take this decision at some point. And I think in cricket, you do want it to be exactly what we've talked about, the conversations and the options there, and that the personal development and welfare would just encompass all those conversations, and the support has grown exponentially since my day, I'd say.
Amy?
Just finally, one of the things that really stuck out for me when speaking to Megan was in the WBBL bubble that they had this year, so it was bio bubble, Leah Tahu and Amy Satterthwaite were there with Gracie. And Megan said it was such an amazing thing that you'd come back from a game, maybe you had a bit of a rubbish day and you weren't feeling it, and you'd come in and you'd see these two women with their little girl, and she had all these players around her who were all making a fuss over her. And she said that seeing something like that was so important, because it made her realise that me and Jess can do this. Any of us can do this. We can have the career, we can have our child, we can marry it together. And that is, I think, the more and more, we're going to see this more and more. And I think that's going to be so important for this next generation of women that are coming through that we're going to get to a stage where you no longer have to give up your sporting career if you want to have a family. I think we're getting towards that, and that is going to be so important for the next generations.
Fine words, Amy. Fine words. And certainly at the moment, there's a lot of youngsters, isn't there, in the international game because of the professionalism. We're seeing lots of 19-year-olds, even younger, in Deepti Sharma making her debut at 17, 19-year-olds, 20-year-old students in the game who are still there with players at the higher end of their career. So they will be visibly seeing these role models and seeing the possibilities from their teenage years. So again, coming up through the system, knowing that it is possible, there is support there, and they can map their lives out a little more accordingly.